Welcome back now for the news in detail. A U.S. Congressional House panel has issued a subpoena to Special Envoy Zalmi Khalilzad demanding an explanation for the failure of U.S. Taliban talks. Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Elliot Angel says Khalilzad will appear before the House panel on September 19th. Meanwhile, in a televised interview, Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said the group had concluded the peace accord with the U.S. He said if the Americans withdraw from the deal, a safe exit of U.S. troops from Afghanistan cannot be guaranteed. Peace talks between the United States and the Taliban began last October in Qatar. The discussions were held to end nearly 2 decades of war in Afghanistan. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will consider an interim trade deal with China until a permanent pact can be reached. The president's remarks come as the world's 2 largest economies prepare for a new round of talks to resolve their trade war. Washington and Beijing have made moves to build confidence ahead of the dialogue. China has renewed purchases of U.S. farm goods and excluded some American goods from retaliatory tariffs. President Donald Trump has reciprocated by delaying a tariff hike on Chinese goods by 2 weeks. But Trump says he would prefer to finalize a fully fledged agreement with Beijing.
I see a lot of analysts are saying an interim deal, meaning we'll do pieces of it, the easy ones first. But there's no easy or hard. There's a deal or there's not a deal.
A panel of the U.S. House of Representatives has voted to intensify an impeachment probe against President Donald Trump. The committee adopted a resolution that classifies the hearings as impeachment proceedings. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler says allegations of corruption, obstruction and abuse of power will be probed aggressively. Republicans have dismissed the resolution as a fantasy. They say Democrats lack the votes to obtain House authorization for Trump's impeachment. Speaker of Britain's Parliament John Bercow has pledged to stop a no-deal Brexit. He says he will use procedural creativity if the government tries to bulldoze a no-deal through the House of Commons. Delivering a lecture in London, Bercow said he would not be bound by any time limit or existing rules. He said the only possible Brexit is one explicitly endorsed by MPs. He said the new law passed before Parliament's prorogation requires the government to seek a delay in Brexit until January 31st. The delay will stay in place unless Parliament approves a Brexit deal by October 19th. But Johnson has said he would prefer being dead in a ditch rather than to ask EU for another delay. Eleven people have been killed after a boat capsized during a religious ceremony in central Indian state of Bhopal. Around 20 people had set out in a boat to immerse a huge worshipping idol in a lake near Khatalapura Ghat. Police say 5 others have been rescued while a search for survivors is underway. Madhya Pradesh State Chief Minister Kamal Nath has ordered a high-level inquiry into the accident. Moving on, 10 people have been killed in a stampede at an election campaign rally for Mozambique's president, Filipe Nyusi. Hospital authorities in the city of Nampula say 98 others are being treated for injuries. They say people were crushed as they attempted to leave the election rally through a single gate. Interior Minister Basilio Montero says he has ordered an inquiry into the incident. Mozambique is in the midst of campaigning for general elections on October 15th. Seven people have been killed and 10 others wounded in an explosion in southeast Turkey. A vehicle was destroyed by explosives planted on the road. The explosion occurred in the Kalp district of the southeastern Turkish province of Diyarbakir. The provincial governor's office says the Kurdistan Workers' Party is behind the attack. Turkey's President Erdogan said all means will be used to arrest the perpetrators. The Kurdistan Workers' Party is designated a terrorist organization by Ankara and its Western allies. Meanwhile, 2 people have been killed after a storm pounded parts of eastern Spain with a record rainfall. Severe weather warnings have been issued after torrential rains burst riverbanks and swept away cars. The victims, aged between 51 and 61, died in the Castilla-La Mancha region. Authorities have ordered schools in Valencia and the Murcia region to close after heavy rains were forecast. Officials have advised people in affected areas to stay indoors. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says emergency services are working to minimize the storm's effects. The National Weather Service says the regions of Valencia, Alicante and Murcia will be hit by similar storms today. Meanwhile, in the United States, makeshift courts have been set up in South Texas to help process thousands of migrants from Mexico after crossing the border. U.S. Customs and Border Protection estimates 42,000 immigrants are waiting for a U.S. court date. U.S. immigration official Albert Flores says the makeshift 10 courtrooms will speed up the proceedings of cases. A small number of migrants will appear for hearings before these courts in Laredo and Brownsville. Over 25 10 courtrooms will provide video conferencing so judges who are away from the border can hear cases remotely. Italy has reached a deal with the several EU countries to take in migrants aboard a charity ship in the Mediterranean. The Ocean Viking is carrying 82 Africans rescued in various operations off the coast of Libya. 17 minors are among the migrants on the French rescue vessel. It is run by the NGOs SOS Mediterranean and Doctors Without Borders. Earlier, a pregnant woman and her husband were rescued from the ship and taken to Malta due to a medical emergency. The rescue ship is currently stranded at a sea between Malta and the Italian island of Lampedusa. As Rome considers its request for a safe port, the new Italian government has promised to change its response to the migrant influx following the departure of hardline Interior Minister Matteo Salvini. Germany has expressed concern over the increased migrant flow into the European Union from Turkey. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas discussed the issue in a phone call with his Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu. Foreign Minister Maas says he had a very constructive talk with Cavusoglu. He says the EU will honor its commitments under the refugee agreement with Turkey and expects the same from Ankara. Maas said Germany will remain in close contact with Turkey. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his government is preparing a roadmap to implement a peace deal for eastern Ukraine. Zelensky was speaking in Kiev alongside the visiting president of Finland. President Zelensky hopes the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, Germany and France will discuss the plan at a meeting this month. Ukraine has been fighting Russian-backed forces in the eastern Donbass region for 5 years. The conflict has killed 13,000 people. Violence continues in the region despite a ceasefire agreed in 2015 in the Belarus capital, Minsk. Coming up next in the bulletin after a short break is... Traditional activities mark mid-season festival. Two-wheeler taxis make big splash in Lagos. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Russia says it believes the war in Syria is over. In an interview, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the war is now confined to 2 areas, not controlled by the government. Lavrov said Russia is now focused on organizing humanitarian assistance for Syrians. He said Moscow is working to establish a political process to stabilize Syria and the rest of the Middle East. Lavrov said US and EU sanctions against the Syrian government are counterproductive. Earlier, President Vladimir Putin said Russia will continue to support the Syrian government against rebels. Meanwhile, the New York Times has reported the Pentagon is preparing to deploy 150 troops to northeastern Syria. The US troops would conduct joint ground patrols with Turkish forces in a safe zone established to prevent a Turkish military incursion. The UN has warned some 2 million people in Somalia are at a risk of starving. The country is currently facing its worst drought since 2011. United Nations Relief Chief Mark Lowcock says decades of conflict and a lack of investment has exacerbated the crisis. Speaking at the end of a two-day visit, Lowcock said droughts have become more frequent. He said erratic rains have triggered recurring floods in the country. The UN's recent food security analysis shows the April to June harvest was the worst since 2011. Some 2.6 million people have already been displaced as a result of natural disasters. In southwest Somalia, almost 400,000 people have fled drought, terror attacks and armed conflict in the past 3 years. Now, in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has tabled a new bill to Parliament to further tighten the country's gun laws. The bill marks 6 months since the terrorist attacks on two mosques in Christchurch, which killed 51 Muslims. This is New Zealand's second set of gun reforms after the government identified weak weapon laws as a key reason behind the atrocity. The bill includes the creation of a registry to monitor and track every firearm legally held in New Zealand. It also tightens rules on licensing, binding individuals to renew their license every 5 years instead of every 10. Earlier, Prime Minister Ardern said the government took action to remove semi-automatic weapons, and now it moves a step further.
Today, the government has also introduced legislation into the House that will help ensure gun ownership is restricted to responsible users and stop the flow of guns into the black market.
The trial of terrorist Brenton Tarrant responsible for these attacks will begin in June 2020. Now, in Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan will address a rally in Azad Jammu and Kashmir today over New Delhi's atrocities in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Khan's rally is being held at the university ground to highlight the plight of Kashmiris after India's illegal annexation. Earlier, Khan stressed he will show the Kashmiris that Pakistan stands resolutely with them. PM Khan said the rally will send a message to the world about continuing siege in Indian-occupied Kashmir. He will address the people of Kashmir before leaving for New York to address UN General Assembly's New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout in the valley has entered its 40th day. Events are underway across China to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival, which falls on Friday this year. In East China's Zhejiang province, people are taking part in Lianhua performances, also called fire walking. Performers walk barefoot across burning coals. The fire is used to ward off evil spirits and pray for good fortune. In Wanzai, locals enjoy folk activities as they celebrate the festival. Colorful lanterns, tasty foods, firework displays and traditional apparel leave a deep impression on tourists. The Nigerian capital of Lagos is known for having some of the worst traffic in Africa. Even the simple act of getting to work in the morning is an ordeal that can take hours. Now, a number of ride-hailing services have stepped up onto the roads, offering motorcycle taxis that whiz through congested streets. More in this report.
Imagine leaving for work hours in advance of your office opening but still arriving late. This is an ordeal many Lagos natives go through every day. Having had enough of the daily torture, many have forsaken their cars in favor of motorcycle ride-hailing apps. But this is not a new form of transport in Nigeria. Informal motorcycle taxis called Okadas have operated here for years.
The difference is the Okada riders, they maneuver anyhow in hold up and in any street. They don't respect customers, their passengers, but Shapion respect their customers and they drive safely.
Thanks to the arrival of companies like Max Okada and Oride, unregulated Okada drivers are now becoming an endangered species. Riding a two-wheeler taxi for a company can earn the driver 3 to 5 times what an informal Okada rider makes. Okada riders also have to deal with extortion and harassment from local police.
I'm an electrician before, but actually I have my own Okada that I used to manage myself. But when I see that all this, pay money today, pay money tomorrow, and the police also, I have to say so. I have to find another thing to do. When they introduce this one to me, I'm very happy.
But these companies haven't managed to solve all of the Nigerian capital's transport problems just yet. Max Okada and Oride customers complain of navigation problems and drivers using longer routes to inflate fares. Regardless, these companies are here to stay. The worldwide two-wheeler taxi market is expected to be valued at $9 billion by 2021.
Now, in the business stories, OPEC has agreed to trim oil output by asking over producing members Iraq and Nigeria to bring production in line with their targets. The group is looking to prevent a glut amid soaring U.S. production and a slowing global economy. Oil prices have dropped below $60 a barrel from this year's peak of $75. Prices dropped as fears of a global recession outweigh concerns about falling supply from sanctions hit Iran and Venezuela's. OPEC's second largest producer, Iraq, has pledged to reduce output by 175,000 barrels a day by next month. Nigeria will reduce supply by 57,000 barrels a day. Meanwhile, Saudi Energy Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman says the kingdom will continue to pump less than its target.
Between OPEC plus member countries, I would like also to declare our strong solidarity with our colleagues in the implementation of the production agreement.
U.S. internet giant Google has agreed to pay $1 billion settlement to end a tax dispute with France. The payment comprises a fine of $503 million plus additional taxes of $514 million. The fiscal fraud probe that began 4 years ago investigated Google's non-payment of dues to France. Investigators claim the tech giant avoided tax by not declaring parts of its activities. The payment follows similar out-of-court settlements by Google in Italy and Britain over recent years. Google says it now wants to see a coordinated reform for a clear international taxation framework. French Justice Minister Nicole Belloubet and Budget Minister Gerald Darmanin have welcomed the arrangement. The European Central Bank has promised indefinite fresh assets purchases and cut interest rates deeper into negative territory. The efforts aimed to prop up the ailing Eurozone economy was cheered by financial markets. The European Central Bank has reduced interest rates for the first time since 2016 as it looks to stimulate economic growth. The ECB cut its deposit rate by 10 basis points to a record low of -0.5%. The moves will increase pressure on the U.S. Federal Reserve and Bank of Japan to lower their interest rates. The rate cut will increase the cost to commercial banks of parking their €1 trillion worth. Asian stock markets are trading high amid optimism about forthcoming trade talks between United States and China. Investors are also encouraged by the economic stimulus measures unveiled yesterday by the European Central Bank. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index is leading gains in Asia of more than 1% to a fourth-month high. The Hang Seng index in Hong Kong has also gained a fraction, while Sydney's ASX 200 index is trading flat. Stock markets in China and South Korea are closed for a holiday. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, with the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and update, keep watching Indus News.